This is the only story we really get of Jesus' childhood. None of the other Gospels give us anything to work with here, but we're all kind of curious, right? There's like this huge section of Jesus' life that we don't know anything about. It's kind of mysterious. We're all kind of curious about it. And some have argued that this text isn't historical. For one, they say because it's not in the other Gospels, but you can't really start that because every Gospel has some unique stuff in it. But people will say, oh, this seems to be, it kind of looks like legendary stories of Moses and Alexander the Great. But really, this is it's more reined in than a legendary story. There's really nothing over the top in this story. Jesus is impressive here, but he doesn't look supernatural. He doesn't actually look divine in this moment. He looks like a regular boy who's just a standout. He looks like an exceptional student. And so if you're making up a story about Jesus, if you're trying to convince people that he's the Messiah, if you're trying to convince people, no, look, even as a kid, he was God, you're going to put together a much more spectacular story of his childhood. And a lot of people did. About 100 years after Jesus, you start seeing these stories that are surely forgeries, that aren't true. And then we call them the infancy gospels is kind of the name we've attached to a bunch of them. But there's a bunch of different stories. There's the gospel of James, the infancy gospel of Thomas. And they tell all these stories about Jesus as a child. And they're the kind of the over-the-top stories you would look for if you were going to make up some stories about Jesus. A famous one you can see here in the middle is the story about baby Jesus, or infant little boy Jesus, making a clay pigeon and then bringing it to life. Maybe you've heard that one. They show it in The Passion of the Christ. They show that as in one of the flashbacks. There's a story about Jesus running into a boy, like a boy bumping into him, and Jesus curses him, and the boy just like drops dead. He heals James from being bit by a snake. He heals the poison out of him. There's stories of his soiled diapers being touched on people and they're healed. I'd say you can't make this stuff up, but someone did. Someone made this stuff up. And so we gather that these are forgeries for several reasons. They're very anachronistic language use. There's a lack of understanding of ancient Israeli culture in some of these. They're written way after some of the closer to primary sources that we have in the Gospels. And really the Bible seems to refute it. Because remember, when Jesus runs into his family, they all don't believe him as an adult. They're kind of like, hey, you're embarrassing us. Hey, isn't that the carpenter's son? Everybody in his hometown is like, he's nothing special. And so that really kind of refutes the idea because that he was doing all these miracles. Because otherwise, they would have been like, yeah, he healed me of snake poison. Yeah, his dirty diaper healed my uncle's glaucoma. They would remember these things and they would all buy in. But that didn't happen. And so you can tell from that he had a really regular childhood. And these stories were probably written because people were interested in his boyhood and they were uncomfortable with the idea. People were very uncomfortable with the idea that God was a regular child. Far too crass for the God of the universe to be a humble, regular, crying, needy baby. Far too undignified for the Alpha and the Omega to stub his toe and have to be taught by his parents. People were uncomfortable with that idea, so they had to go back and kind of make these stories to give God more dignity. I mean, looking at these pictures, do they creep you out a little bit? Let's see, this one right here, he's got my hairline. One thing that they would do in medieval paintings, and it's really strange, they were so uncomfortable with the idea of God being a baby that they paint him as if he was like a little man, as if he came out a little man walking and talking, and which to them that was giving him dignity. But to me, it's a little weird. It's kind of creepy because we believe he was a regular baby. This one on the far on my far right here, that is the depiction of the virgin birth according to the Quran. That's right, kids. Jesus is in the Quran. The virgin birth is in the Quran. There's a take on the Lord's Supper in the Quran. And Muslims believe in the virgin birth. But it tells this story in the Quran where Mary just has this baby, and then these people see her, and they think, Mary, this is such a bad thing you've done. You know, you're a sinner. You've had this baby out of wedlock. And then the infant baby Jesus, just been born, says, no, she didn't. The baby speaks in the Quran, giving him this dignity and this power that the Bible never attributed to him. The miracles of Jesus in the Quran also come from these infancy gospels. And so you can see how the Quran actually borrowed from previous sources. And all this to say, these are what the made-up stories look like. What we have in Luke is a glimpse of what I believe is the actual historical childhood of Jesus. And so in this text, we see Jesus' family making this pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And it's for the Passover. It's about an 80-mile journey. So that's the equivalent of us walking to San Angelo. Be a 3 to 4 day trip. Not easy. And you can see Jesus' family going above and beyond in several different ways here. Women weren't required to make this trip. But they're so pious and they're so religious that the women go on the trip. And once you go, you're really only required to stay for 2 days. But they stay the full 8 days. So we're talking about a very devout, very religious family. And Luke wants to make that clear. Luke wants to make clear that they're rule followers. And he also probably wants to make clear they support the temple. They're not anti-institutional. They're not the people in the wilderness rejecting the temple. They're here. And today, they're kind of like the people who come every time the doors are open at church, right? They're the ones still mad about not having Sunday night church. They're the ones they're going to be here on Christmas Day and New Year's Day. That's right. Both of those are on Sunday this year. Jesus' family, they were the type that would be there, and they're going to keep roll of who's not. We're not going to do that. But they're the ones they're committed members. And Luke, he likely wanted to emphasize that because I think even then, there were people like we struggle with, like our culture struggles with today, that say, I'm spiritual, not religious. I can be with God without those people. I can be with God without the accountability. But Luke's trying to say, look, these traditions, these customs, these practices, they're all really important. Community is important. Worship is important. Don't give these things up. Jesus didn't abolish all of that. These things are important. And so they go, and I'm sure they have this really nice time. And then they leave. And they lose Jesus. Raising Jehovah God was a big responsibility. And, it's kind of like, hey, y'all had one job. And they kind of messed up here. They forgot him. But come on. Kids, have your parents ever lost you before? Yes. You ever been forgotten somewhere? Yes. If your parents have forgot you, raise your hand. Yeah, that's a lot of us, right? It happens to the best of us. We've all been forgotten somewhere. But losing a kid like that, for that long of a time, you would think he's like the third kid, right? Those are the ones who get neglected, but this is a firstborn. Come on. And today, and we're talking, he was missing for days. For days. Today, that's national news. That's a big deal. I can't imagine what the parents are thinking. And so they go back and they find him in the temple. And he's not teaching. Sometimes we think, oh, he's there teaching. No, he's there listening, asking questions, probably conversing some. Is it impressive? Yeah. They're impressive. He's asking the right questions. He seems to be picking this up really quick. They're amazed at this stuff. But he's not the top rabbi here. He's still very much a normal kid, maybe a standout, but nothing miraculous here. He's 12, which in this culture, in this day and age, that's on the verge of manhood. 13 back then was, you're a man. Not so much now. That's hard to believe. But he's there. And he's sticking around and he's talking to rabbis, which could be seen as something similar to interviewing for colleges. It's almost like a recruiting thing. If you're a good standout, if you have a lot of knowledge of the scriptures, a rabbi might pick you up. You might have a rabbi who teaches you. So really this is all somewhat normal behavior. But as we think about this month, as we think about being like a child, Jesus saying, become like a child to enter the kingdom of heaven. He himself is actually modeling that well. And he's modeling what a child looks like and what a child does. And one big takeaway I have here is a child is willing to humbly learn. A child, to have this, if we as adults are going to be like a child, then we need to be lifelong learners. Here, even the omniscient God, who I think gave that up when he became human, the omniscient God of the universe is sitting here letting regular old people teach him. Learning from us. So weird. And it'd be easy to think, well, they have nothing to teach him. But he did it. He let them take part. He let them teach him. And he's letting guys teach him who maybe 20-ish years later are going to be the same guys trying to embarrass him in public by beating him in an argument. The same guys who might have been calling for his death, trying to get rid of him. But here he is being taught by these guys. So a humble learner, a childlike learner, can learn from anybody, even if they're people we don't like, even if they're people who are opponents or who are going to be opponents. A humble learner, it doesn't matter the credentials of whoever they're learning from. Doesn't matter their gender. Doesn't matter their education. Doesn't matter their age, which are all some things that for some of us, those things seem to keep us from wanting to learn from those people, right? With education, it's funny. Some people are like, if this guy's got an education, I'll listen. And some people are like, if this guy's got an education, he doesn't know nothing. There's all these little things that keep us from wanting to learn from people. But a young child that knows little, kind of said, I don't know much. They're willing to learn from anyone. It doesn't matter their credentials. And no one likes a know-it-all. Because know-it-alls don't really know it all. They really don't. And if you know it all, once you think you know it all, how are you going to learn? How are you going to learn? There's nothing left. They have it all figured out. And here God models not being a know-it-all. It seems like with some of us, we get to this point where we're like, oh, that's it. Got it all figured out. I have nothing new to learn. And any new information, I'm going to fight against it. Unless it's something really convenient to believe, right? We'll believe stuff. We'll believe new things if it's really convenient. But a lot of us, most of our beliefs are really kind of set, and we won't challenge them. Now, we do need to have some givens, right? Like 2 + 2 = 4. There's some things that I'm just not going to question. But sometimes we may be wrong about our givens. And when we're wrong about our givens, we can't learn. So we may need to even question. We need to be willing to question a lot so that we can learn. Because some of us, we have too many givens and there's just nothing new. But we need to have that mixed with skepticism, right? I mean, something wild that's going on in our world right now is the flow of information. I mean, what's happening here is some of us are open-minded and some of us are so open-minded we're becoming gullible, right? Like, man, all these internet fun internet conspiracies, right? Thinking birds are spy robots. Okay, you've become too open-minded. Thinking the moon isn't real or that, King Charles is a vampire. There's some things that we've just gone, it's weird where we're going with some of this stuff. So we need a childlike ability to learn and listen, but we also need to have a healthy skepticism where we're not just gullible, right? Where we're not just believing anything. But learning about God and who he is, it's a process. And there's, like I said, I think there's so many times I have him pinned, but he's shrouded in mystery. And it's frustrating when he kind of says, nope, that's not who I am, when I see him doing more, but it's also exciting. There's so many ways where God has shown me he's bigger than what I thought. Like, oh, he really does care. about those people that no one said they don't care, God doesn't care about those people, but we kind of said it. Or maybe he can use that person in a powerful way that I did not think he could. Or maybe he's not as concerned about, like, I don't know, the kind of petty, weird things that we get hung up on and say God cares. Kind of realizing, like, oh, no, wait, that's just us. We care about that stuff. Maybe he doesn't. Or maybe he is actually working in China and in Muslim-dominated countries where the church doesn't seem present. Maybe he can work without the church being there. Maybe he really can forgive some of these unforgivable sins. Maybe God isn't mad all the time. Maybe God is more concerned about my heart than my political views. There are so many ways where God just keeps showing me he's bigger than I thought. You know, no one has ever told me, no one's ever come out and spoke this sentence. We have a very small and petty God. No one's ever said that to me. But they kind of have subliminally. Some well-meaning people have kind of taught me that. And some of that needed to be undone. Maybe some of what we believe about God and his people and what it means to follow him needs to be undone a little bit. We need to be open to new expressions and new ways. And that'll take a childlike humility that is willing to learn and listen and willing to humbly say, I don't have it all figured out. Or maybe I was wrong about this. And in doing that, I believe God will excite us as we learn more and more about how big he is and how we can join him in his mission. You see, Mary is going through this process at the beginning of Luke, and really maybe throughout Luke, where it keeps kind of unraveling who this baby is and who this God is. You know, when the shepherds come to visit, chapter 2, verse 19, it says she treasured this in her heart, or stored this in her heart, and pondered it, thinking, who is this baby? What is happening? He is really special. He seems to be more than just a prophet. There's something big happening here. With every event, she sees a little bit more and more of who this baby is and sometimes can't even believe it. She has this run-in the temple with these prophets. And again, it says she treasured this and pondered it in her heart. She's filled with wonder of who this God is, who this kid is. And then in our scripture this morning, when he said, I was in my Father's house, the text says they didn't even understand. They did not understand what he was saying. I think there's a lot of times like that, where they're just shocked and getting confused. And I feel like that with God sometimes. I don't quite grasp who you are and what you want. She didn't fully comprehend who or what Jesus was in this moment. And sometimes neither do we. Because you can't fully explain how big our God is. And any attempt doesn't quite do him justice. You can't quite wrap your mind around him as much as we want to. But you can keep getting glimpses of who he is. Keep getting a taste of what he is. And I like that they didn't stop because they don't understand. They didn't give up because they couldn't codify him in these easily teachable ways to hand down. And while there's some frustration in that, there's also some wonder in that. I'm glad we can't box God up. It's just a lot more interesting this way. I'm glad he keeps showing us that his love is deeper and his reach is further than we can imagine. And so we have this childlike wonder as we'll never get God figured out. There will never be a dull moment. So I think the gospel and the message this morning is that we have an unfathomably big God who knows what it's like to be very small. And so I want to challenge you this morning to be open to seeing him work in new and different ways that you didn't think possible. To be open to the way he may challenge some of our givens. And to be open to being shaped by him. If you're here this morning and you need prayers, if you want to give your life to Christ, if you have any need, your church family is here. Please come as together we stand and sing.